Oh, hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Oh, okay. So today my talk is, yeah, just blew my punchline, but that's okay. So have you ever walked into a house and felt an immediate sense of unease? Well, about 10 years ago, I was at my SO's apartment on the 4th floor in North Austin. And just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here, it's the same complex that they filmed Office Space at. There's the slide. So I walked down the 4 flights of stairs to the parking lot to get something out of my car. And when I walked back up the stairs and walked back into the apartment, I immediately felt like something was terribly off. It probably had something to do with a woman laying on a blanket in the middle of the living room floor wearing nothing but a smile. So to my horror, I realized I walked in the wrong apartment. I was 1 floor off. Well, that was 10 years ago, and since then, I've walked into nearly 100 strangers' houses. But don't worry, that's because I'm an assistant to the Weird Homes Tour. Weird Homes Tour is a for-profit social benefit company based in Austin, Texas, that works with homeowners across the United States to open up their weird, otherworldly, strange, interesting houses for the public to tour for one day. So I've met a lot of interesting hosts, I've walked into a lot of strangers' houses, and I've soaked up the vibe of a lot of these different spaces. These people in spaces that have inspired me, intrigued me, creeped me the hell out, but in the best way, overwhelmed me, and made me feel cozy and welcome. And as a community consultant, I've also walked into a lot of online communities. And what I've learned is that whether physical or virtual, that initial feeling you get when you first walk through that door sets the tone for the remainder of your experience there, right? So this moment is pivotal. It should not be left up to chance. This moment should be strategic and purposeful. It should have craft, and it should be predictable. So the worst feeling in the world is to walk in a community that you fully expect to belong to and feel out of place, like you've just walked into the wrong apartment at the wrong time. So what feelings does your community inspire in your members? Well, the feeling that we want to inspire in our members is this feeling of walking into a good friend's house for the very first time, but feeling like you've been there a million times before. You know, that instant belonging, that sense of community, that feeling of emotional safety, the feeling that you're being seen and heard and that you matter, the feeling that you can be yourself and be vulnerable, and that excited, inspired feeling of wanting to learn and grow and share with other people. Now, organizations want your members to have a sense of community because research shows that it leads to high engagement, activity, investment, and member retention. So it is an easy sell. Yes, we want our members to have a sense of community, but it's not so easy to measure. I mean, how do you measure a feeling, right? How do you measure whether your community members want to even be there? It's not so easy. So while we want our members to look and feel and act like this, hands across America, we as community managers and builders end up looking like this because we are consumed with wanting to correlate metrics with a sense of community. Now, metrics are important. They're extremely important in telling us the potential of engagement, but that doesn't necessarily tell us the real picture. So we may have a high number of page visits and post views, but you can infer from that that the content is useful, but you can't necessarily say that that content is contributing to your member sense of community. But luckily, we have a tool called the SCI, Sense of Community Index tool. Now, this is based on McMillan and Chavez's decades of research. And you can use this tool to kind of measure whether our members have an overall sense of community. But even with this awesome, wonderful tool, there are challenges. So we send out our surveys, but oftentimes we don't get enough results back in order to get a decent margin of error and confidence level. In other words, can we confidently hang our hat on these results? Now, I have personally seen a community of 36,000 members propose sweeping changes to their platform based on 7 responses that they got at a conference. Don't do that. And then there's the inherent issue that members with a low SOC, sense of community, don't fill out surveys. And then coupled with that, members have to be in the community long enough for you to measure the level of SOC. So how do you do this? and then now what? So you send out the surveys, you get enough responses back, and you find out that you have an SOC problem. But that survey isn't going to tell you where in your process and platform to make your changes. So metrics and survey results are kind of like DNA at a crime scene. You may have the DNA, but that doesn't quite tell you the motives behind how it got there. So how do we find out what your members aren't telling you? You create this intricate, vast network of drones and security cameras. I'm just making sure you're awake. No, along with the metrics and survey results and everything else that you're currently doing, my proposal to you today is to take the SCI tool and flip the script. So what I mean by that is take the survey items and turn them into a checklist for yourself as you walk through this community through your members' eyes. Now, in order to effectively do this, you must first understand your members. You must know that your members' goals are probably not the same as your organizational goals. You must identify why your members walk through that door in the first place. You must know their hopes and aspirations. You must find out what motivates them to learn and grow. And it doesn't hurt to also know what problems they're facing in their industry. And then along with this, as a community admin and builder, you are wearing all the hats. You're the all-seeing, all-knowing community god. And so it's kind of like not being able to see the forest for the trees. As a community manager, you might not be able to see the trees for the forest. So in order to effectively see your community through your members' eyes, you must shed your bias and probably your ego if you had a hand in building the community from the ground up. And so without bias and with a deep understanding of your members, reverse engineer this sense of community index tool and use it as a guide as you walk through this house you've built to reveal issues and opportunities that you might not have seen before. So let's practice. So one of the main elements of sense of community is membership, spirit. And one of the main attributes of membership is emotional safety. So imagine you're wearing your laundry day clothes or mermaid outfit, and you've got a six-pack of beer, you're walking up to a house, and you expect to have a casual hang, a casual get-together, watch the game. But you walk through that door, and instead you're met with a black tie event. That's uncomfortable as hell. I'm just going to turn around and go home, right? So that's kind of what happened with a community that shall remain nameless. The community manager in there was crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, but she couldn't quite figure out why members weren't engaging. And it wasn't until she did this process, this practice of seeing her community through her members' eyes as it pertains to emotional safety, that she realized what was happening. You see, all her posts were these well-researched, intricate, beautifully written, detailed, long posts that intimidated the hell out of her members, to the point where they didn't want to contribute, because admittedly there was nothing left to contribute. There were no CTAs. And so she realized then that the tone of her post actually negatively impacted this safe space for her members. So what your members might not be telling you is that they don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to open up themselves and be themselves, and they don't feel comfortable posting questions of their colleagues because they fear looking dumb, being intimidated, being humiliated. Like a lot of communities out there, EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund community, is asking their members to share their story. But instead of a new member walking through that door and seeing these beautifully written, well-crafted stories from members, they've decided to proactively create this safe space for the members by taking that story-building process and breaking it up into digestible chunks. In fact, a member doesn't see the second step in the process until they've completed the previous step, and then so on. And members only see other members' progress as they progress themselves. So it's an ingenious way of taking this potentially intimidating experience and turning it into an opportunity for the members to emotionally connect and to build this safe space together as they walk through this process of writing their advocacy stories. Another example of a community that's proactively creating a safe space for the members is IET, the Institution of Engineering and Technology. Now, the engineers in there, they're rocking and rolling, they're posting questions of each other. But remember, that doesn't necessarily mean that these members have this emotional safety in order to be vulnerable and self-disclose. In other words, it's one thing to ask your members about wiring and regulations. It's another thing entirely to ask your colleagues if they also feel out of their depth. So IET created this option of submitting anonymous questions, and they've also created a persona, like a positive mascot, and the safe space where they post these anonymous questions for other members to contribute and reply. Another attribute of membership is boundaries. Now, this really cool speakeasy in downtown Austin called the Floppy Disk Repair. There's a code on the door, and that code changes week to week. And you must know someone who knows someone to get the code to get in. But once you walk through that door and you see other members seeing you or other people seeing you, you've made it, then there's this amazing feeling of exclusivity and validation that washes over you, right? And that's the feeling we want to inspire in our members. Now, the absolute opposite of this, I feel, is like who's who among American high school students. And in my day, 100 years ago, it was touted as an honor to be included in this book. But it wasn't until you flipped through the pages that you saw that every single one of your classmates was included. And that's because the threshold to get in this book was negligible, because the end goal of the company was to sell books to proud parents. So what your members aren't telling you is that a low barrier to enter in the community does not inspire feelings of validation and exclusivity. The higher the barrier, the higher the feeling of belonging. A low barrier immediately eliminates one ingredient to developing that sense of community in your members right off the bat. And sometimes this barrier is not in our hands. We can't do anything about it. Sometimes the organization is prioritizing member acquisition over developing that feeling of exclusivity in your members. In other words, it's probably a monetary boundary. You pay the membership fee, you're in. Well, if your community has a monetary boundary, then you can supplement a secondary boundary in the form of a nested community. And this nested community can involve intersectionality, social identities, demographics, passions. ASSP, the American Society for Safety Professionals, everybody that walks through that door is a safety professional. And so there's this homogenous group that you immediately belong to. But when you walk through that door, a member must then differentiate themselves from the homogeneity in order to cement their identity in the community and truly feel like you belong. And ASSP knows this, so they've created a nested community for women in safety profession. Now, the next attribute of membership is belonging and identity. So imagine you walk into a house and there's people milling about, and that's good. But then you notice that everyone's wearing that same gray, blank mask on their face, and they're all turning to you and staring at you. Well, that creeps me out. I'm going to turn around and go home, right? Now, that's kind of like what it is for a member to walk into a community and be faced with all those default gray avatars. You might know what I'm talking about. So that does not inspire feelings of belonging and identity. So what your members might not be telling you is that in a very literal, visual sense, when they walk through that door, they may not see that they have anything in common with other members. They may not see and recognize themselves in the constituency. They may not see people that look and act like them. NWF, the National Wildlife Federation Eco Leaders Community, wants to make their community feel lived in and alive and inviting, so they encourage their members to upload a profile picture. But to overcome emotional issues where members might not be ready to upload a picture of themselves, they've created this avatar menu about specific passions about wildlife so that members can select from their passions and upload that instead. ADA, the American Diabetes Association, also wants to encourage this feeling of belonging and identity. So they've created this badging menu based on illness type. And these badges are nested underneath the avatar throughout the community. So that if you walk into ADA with type 1 diabetes, you immediately see other people who look and act like you, you can identify with, interacting in this safe space. And my final example of this practice is the element of investment. This is actually from like Nightmare on Elm Street, part 3 or 4. So imagine you walk into a house for a party, and you look to your left and you see a buffet table covered with rotting food and 25-cent bag of chips that you could get down at the gas station. What your members aren't telling you is that static content, announcements that haven't been updated in a year, stock photos, information that they could have easily gotten through Google, does not tell the member that the community is invested in them. So why would they want to invest in the community? And it's a common practice for community managers, for the onus to be on them to upload the content continually, keeping the community refreshed, and that is not sustainable. CRP, the Climate Reality Project community, knows this, and after a few iterations, they've created this environment where the members are ecstatic and stoked and excited to contribute. And they did this by making the active contribution a shared community goal to beat the last year's goal. They also did this by making individual contributions visible in a leaderboard format. So in conclusion, there's no out-of-the-box standard platform configuration that's going to inspire a sense of community in your members, obviously, because every community is different. So in order to actually inspire this sense of community in your members, it's a little bit of art and science. The science is completely understanding the psychology behind the sense of community theory by McMillan and Chavez. And then the art is maybe something like taking the SCI tool and turning it into a checklist, but then also using targeted conceptualization as you walk through this house through your members' eyes. So who plus why equals how. If we know the who, if we know your members to the core, and we know the why, which is to inspire this sense of community, then we can determine and become architects of the how. Thank you.